I just got back from my trip to London and I thought I would give you guys a little story time on how that went. So my sister and I flew directly to London and didn't have to worry about catching another plane or anything. And once we got there, we met our grandparents, who also flew to London the same day, and met them at the airport. And a big part of why we went to London in the first place was to meet my dad's extended family, who all still live in the UK. After we checked into our hotel and relaxed for a little bit, we met our dad's uncle and one of his first cousins. It took us for a little walk around our hotel to point out things that we could do that were nearby to us, as well as going over some of the things that they had planned for us. The next day, my sister and I split up from our grandparents and went to Camden Market with our cousin, while our grandparents went with our uncle elsewhere. Camden Market was pretty cool. I did end up getting this magnet of the underground logo with Mind the Gap written on it, and that's because they say mind the gap whenever you get on and off the trains and stuff. And honestly, this is pretty much the only thing we got on our trip. When we got back to the hotel, I texted our grandparents to let them know that we were back, but didn't get a response, which isn't unusual for them to not respond right away. But after a few hours, it got a little worrying. They eventually did knock on our hotel door, which was a relief. But then they said that our grandma got pickpocketed. Her entire purse was taken out of her backpack while they were walking through a protest. Her wallet, her phone, and her passport gone. And our grandfather also didn't set up his phone for international communications either, so that made contacting people back in the US kind of difficult for them. And he doesn't always take his phone with him, so that also made it difficult for us to communicate with him, which explained why they hadn't been responding to our messages. Luckily, she had given one of her cards to our grandfather, so she still had one card left. Making sure she would have a passport so that she could get home back to the US took a few days. Thankfully, she was able to get a temporary one-year passport. During that time, we were still going sightseeing and seeing some shows, like Hamilton, which was really nice to see since I'd only seen it on Disney Plus before, so seeing a live performance was really awesome. Our uncle and cousin took us to see Much Ado About Nothing at the Globe Theatre, which was pretty cool since it's a reconstruction of the Globe Theatre that was built by the Lord Chamberlain's Men, aka the King's Men, which was William Shakespeare's playing company back in the 1600s. It was really cool because it was like an open-air theater, but that was also kind of troublesome because whenever a plane flew over us, it was very hard to hear the actors. Also at the Globe, you can get tickets with seats, or you get tickets where you stand closer to the stage, but then you're standing for the whole performance, which is what we got. But we were also closer to the stage, so it was easier to pick up what the actors were saying if a plane did come over. Other shows that we saw were The Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, and Your Lie in April. We also went to several typical touristy places. Such as Westminster Abbey, the Tower of London, the Greenwich Observatory, the Portrait Gallery, the Natural History Museum, and the British Museum. We had wanted to go to a few more places and museums, but there's so much to see in London, and we spent each day at basically a single place. Partially because we always left the hotel later in the morning or early afternoon, and partially because we could spend several days at each of these places and still not see everything. What was really exciting was the big family gathering that they had, where we met a lot of our dad's extended family, in addition to the two that we had already met. And there was 30 to 35 people there, so it was pretty overwhelming. But they were all super nice, and I am so glad that we got to meet them on this trip. And a few days later, we met Jenny Colgan, who is another one of my dad's cousins, and we didn't think we were going to be able to meet her because our schedules didn't line up. But her schedule changed a little, and she was able to meet us. And we met her the day before we were going to leave, so that was really nice. We also met her husband and one of her sons. I think she was one of the only relatives that I've actually met before. I was so little that I don't actually remember meeting her. When my dad found out that we were meeting her, he sent us an email with these photos of us when we met her. This one is from before we adopted my sister, and this one is from after. This one, she met us in Miami, but for some reason they didn't take any pictures of us with Jenny. After meeting them, we went back to the hotel, and my sister went with our grandparents to see a choir at St. Paul's Cathedral, and I started packing my things for our trip the next day. At the beginning of the trip, our grandfather had given us each 3 10-pound bills, and we finally spent them at the airport because we would have no use for them back in the US. I also wanted some foreign coins, so that was also partially why I wanted to use the bills. And I got this toy British Airways plane because my parents had got me this exact same toy, but United Airlines, when we were going to fly to China to go get my sister. She had actually forgotten that I already had this toy United Airlines plane, and said that the one that we were looking at in the airport was ugly and I should get one of the other ones because it was more proportionally accurate and looked better because of that. And I was like, no way, then they won't match. And then she was like, oh yeah, I forgot. She ended up getting 2 t-shirts that say Mind the Gap with her 30 pounds. The flight back was a little rough because there were several babies and young children, and there was turbulence for like the last half of the flight, which made me really nauseous. So I was mostly trying not to puke, which I failed at. Thankfully, we did arrive without too much of a delay. It was like mid to high 70s throughout our entire trip in London. Now I'm back in the high 90s. The worst parts for me were the cars driving on the left, the signs for the street names being on the buildings, and the countdowns for the crosswalks being 3 seconds before turning red. Anyways, that will be all for today's video. Thanks for watching. Bye!